They are probably playing the worst rugby I have seen since Steve Borthwick took over in 2023.
I totally get the run that Wales have been on, but looked at that game, if you look at it in the cold light of day, they should have. I think you make a pretty good case they should have won it.
Scotland have got away with this one because they've fallen into the same pit that they've kept falling into, but this time they have won.
If France do wipe the floor with Scotland at Murrayfield, wipe the floor with England at Paris, then we would be looking at it as perhaps the most dominant Grand Slam there has ever been in this championship.
Hello, this is The Ruck, the journalists' rugby podcast from The Times and the Sunday Times. Welcome back. What a weekend. What a weekend of Six Nations action. And in studio with me, Alfie Reynolds, to review it all is Stuart Barnes, fresh from the Wiltshire Express. Morning, Barnsey.
Good morning.
Good to see you again. Trains were on time today as well.
Trains were fast.
Which is noteworthy because that doesn't often happen. Also with us, Elgan Alderman, who got back the last Eurostar. You came back from Lille yesterday, Elgan.
I did indeed, yes. It was a strange moment this morning. I had to let Stuart Barnes into the building. If a childhood Elgan had been told that man commentating rugby games one day, I'd be letting him into the building. Who'd have thought that would happen one day?
I've been working here 20 odd years and I still don't have a pass.
Yeah,
Never had one. Never had one.
That always makes me laugh every time that you join us in person, Barnsey, which is always good, but I have to book you in as a guest, which makes no sense to me. But
these maverick England fly halves, you never can trust them with a pass to a building, can you?
So look, round 3 of the Six Nations, brilliant round. We're going to come on to England. I know there's still loads in the paper this morning on Monday morning about the England-Ireland game. We'll come on to that because we had the pod from Saturday from the stands at Twickenham. Maybe a couple of general ones, and then we'll start with the Wales-Scotland game. But generally, into the fallow week now, who's the fallow week come at a good time for? Who's the fallow week come at a bad time for?
I think it's probably come at a good time for Scotland. They turned around their poor start with a wonder performance against England, and then they performed with an English degree of complacency against Wales, and they got away with it. That was the key. The key is if you don't play well, you get away with it. And Scotland did, and they can just reset a little bit now and prepare themselves for their next match. And you know they're in a good situation at the moment.
I think for England and Wales it's come at a good time just because with these 5 matches it does feel a bit like a 5-test cricket series, and if you just keep on losing week to week then it can just get on top of you. So at least England now, after 2 galling defeats, they can perhaps reset a bit and try and have that extra week to focus on what went wrong. But equally, Wales, after the efforts of that Scotland game, an extra week of building on that, hopefully a week of recovery from that, hopefully it'll do them good stead as well before Ireland and Italy in the last 2 rounds.
It's funny, as I was planning to ask you both that question, I was thinking, I'm not actually sure there's anyone that it's a bad time for. I think you can make the case for everyone that it's quite a good time, and maybe that's because there's only 1 rest week this time around, so everyone, for whether you're England and have been humiliated at home or whether you're sides that have picked up good results, it's quite a good time to take stock and have a week off.
10 years or so ago, when you had a few teams with massively powerful squads and teams with weak squads, that extra week was crucial. What I'm talking about really is Italy here. Italy were a hard team first couple of games. As the tournament went on, they became weaker. They got 2 or 3 injuries, whereas France or England or Ireland or Wales at that time could live with those injuries. Italy couldn't. But Italy are building a better squad now. So I think what you say is absolutely right there. Italy now would probably be almost thinking, I wouldn't mind getting hold of England immediately.
Yeah, true. Oh God, we'll come on to that. That trip to Rome for England all of a sudden looks hell of a lot trickier than maybe many people would have expected it was going to be. Most significant result of round 3. 3 quite interesting fixtures, I think, isn't it? England 21, Ireland 42. Geez, Wales 23, Scotland 26, and then France 33, Italy 8. What do you reckon?
I think France-Italy scoreline was just about what people expected it to be. I think Wales-Scotland was closer than a lot of people thought it was going to be, but the result was still what most people thought it would be. Obviously, I think you're staring at Ireland's demolition of England at Twickenham as the result, performance and scoreline that even those with slightly green-tinted lenses perhaps wouldn't have seen coming to quite that degree.
Yeah, I mean, the Scotland-Wales game, the France-Italy game, they're sort of on a scale of escalation. The Alpine, England's defeat against Ireland was Himalayan. Had that been 42-21 in Ireland, you'd have said, blimey, England are rocking now at Twickenham. And to see England eclipsed in every facet of the play from start to finish, and to hear a crowd that was with swing low was getting quieter and quieter. They've got problems now.
Big problems. Yeah. Big problems for England. So thank you to all of you that have got in touch with the email address, theruck@thetimes.co.uk. We will get to that. We will get to the England. We will get to the fallout. I want to start at the Principality, though. That Wales game. Narrow defeat for Wales. Elgan, before the match, Steve Tandy was saying... I found it amazing. I completely understand why, but I found it amazing that you had a Wales head coach basically saying it's not about winning the game, it's about having an improved performance. Well, they certainly got that. How important was that in terms of the performance, just to inject a bit of belief and passion back into this team and this nation?
Yeah, hugely important, because I think it was almost certainly Wales's most complete, best performance since the 2023 World Cup, and it was still in a game that they lost, which shows the parameters we're dealing with right now. I think half the team probably had their best ever game in a Wales jersey. Dewi Lake, Rhys Carey, Ben Carter with a rare start at lock. Aaron Wainwright, he's been Wales's best player really over the past 7 years, but he was great again. Eddie James, talk of that being maybe a coming of age performance for a big young man at outside centre as well. Obviously, there was a lot of heartbreak. It was good old-fashioned Welsh heartbreak where you thought you'd win and lose rather than know you were going to lose after 5 minutes. So it's a very different story. But for more than 70,000 people in the stadium after the 57-odd thousand that had been there for that France game, where it felt more like a Parisian suburb than the Welsh capital, for there to be a decent crowd in the stadium with something to be invested in, something to get them going. Hopefully for Wales, it will have led to a bit of a surge on ticket sales for that final weekend against Italy, because that before the game was looking at an attendance possibly starting in a 4, and hopefully now that will now boost over the next 2 or 3 weeks. So it gave something for Wales to think that, yes, this is now going in the right direction. There were shoots there of something that Wales can now hang their hat on.
Is that enough then, Barnsey? Is the performance and the fact that they've shown something enough for Wales? I messaged a good friend of mine who's a passionate Welshman. He went to Cardiff for the game, and I asked him exactly the same thing, because I was looking at it partly, and I totally get the run that Wales have been on, but looked at that game. If you look at it in the cold light of day, they should have. I think you make a pretty good case they should have won it, but actually, has the run before this been so bad that the result isn't the most important thing?
Well, I think Scotland in that last half hour showed they had the firepower to win that game, so I wouldn't wholly agree with your premise there. But I think the key here, Wales got the performance. They got the performance they needed. But we'd never know. Coaches say one thing to the public and one thing to their camp. But Steve Tandy's very public comment that winning isn't important, performance is all that matters to us. If that is what he said, that probably cost Wales the game, because the higher the level of rugby, the more it's about the psychological power. The self-belief is vital. We when we're writing about rugby, we can talk about the tactics and we can talk about the power of a scrum and a line-out, but the belief in winning has to be pervasive. And obviously it's hard for Wales, having lost so many Six Nations games on the bounce anyway. So I'd have thought that Tandy should be going out there saying, look, even if all of Wales, all of rugby world is laughing, saying we're going to beat Scotland, I really believe we can beat them. And I suspect, Scotland are a better team than Wales, but Scotland, I think, were very complacent in the first half. And had Wales really believed, they might just have got over the line.
The trouble with if Steve Tandy had come out with a big tub thumping address, I think a lot of people would have just thought, "Oh, you're deluding yourself there, Steve." That's wrong. I understand what you're saying, Stu, of course, but you look back the week before, talking in the aftermath of that 54-12 defeat by France, and trying to be positive, and again, people were going, "How can you be positive about this? You've just lost 54-12." At home to France. It's one of those things where, coaches' comments, it is a fine line, isn't it, between wanting to sound bullish, but also being told that you're being deluded in either direction, whether you're being overly positive for something that's negative or overly negative about something that's positive.
But the main thing is he's got to get his players believing, because if his players believe, you'll have a chance of the performance and a chance of the win. If you're worried about what the general public is saying, if you're worried what Elgan, Alderman and Stuart Barnes are going to write, then all you're doing is knocking your team again. And that's why it's a real skill. Andy Farrell, he came out after the game, didn't he? And he said, look, he was a bullion. He said, I didn't care if we won or lost. I wanted a performance which we didn't get for 2 wins. But you can be sure that what he said then and what he said in the dressing room all week didn't amount to the same thing. He would have said, yes, we must get the performance, and if we get the performance, we will win. Wales can't say that because the gap between performance and result is too large at the moment. They've narrowed it a little bit, and now, when they play their next 2 games, they've got to be saying, we can win this game if we get the right performance.
Yeah, I must admit, I found that the Tandy comments a little strange. I get what you're saying, Elgan, that if you get the tone wrong, everyone's going to say, well, what are you talking about? You're absolutely dreadful at the moment, worst Welsh team we've ever seen, etc., etc. But you've got to put belief in, certainly, and hopefully, well, the players, it looked like they had a bit of belief in terms of how they went about their business. Angus emailed us. I want to put this to you both in terms of Scotland. He emailed theruck@thetimes.co.uk, and he said, Scotland's win over Wales is being talked about like a huge achievement. In reality, didn't this just follow their usual pattern of odds-defying underperformance following an odds-defying overperformance? They scraped past arguably the worst Wales side ever thanks to a calamitous error and the bounce of a ball.
But we were talking a lot before the game about how Scotland do tend to lose after beating England, and they did win on this occasion. So they did improve on what history suggests happens, and now they've got this 2-week gap before they welcome France to Murrayfield, which even before the tournament I think was always looking like the major test for France if they were going to win a Grand Slam. That penultimate weekend in Murrayfield, huge French travelling support, great occasion. They've now got over the hump of the post-England game, and they can now really attack that fixture. 2 years ago, they came so close to winning that. That will be difficult for France to win. We'll get on to France, still searching for the Grand Slam in a minute. But, Scotland did just about do enough. I know there were plenty of caveats about where Wales have been, but they found what they needed to do to win in the end, even if there was a bit of fortune, skill, whatever you want to call it later on.
I would say that our emailer was spot on there. I wouldn't have minded writing that for the Times or the Sunday Times. Scotland.
That's your next column done then. You can just copy and paste the email. We haven't read it.
Scotland overachieved outstanding against England. We're talking about performance, not result. They were poor, very poor against Wales. It took the fact that they've got a few magicians in their team in the last half hour to turn it around, and they did keep their poise and turn it around. And in the end, Scotland have got away with this one because they've fallen into the same pit that they've kept falling into, but this time they have won. And now Gregor Townsend can turn around and say, for God's sake, you come up with a performance like that against England and then you're awful. But in the past, their awfulness has resulted in defeat. They've got away with this. And going back to my theme of complacency, Scotland's complacency, it's gone now. They've got France next. France are the best team in the tournament. So they can now say, right, hey, we're underdogs again. And Finn Russell can come out and say, get ready, boys. Here it comes. Here's everything to play for, nothing to lose. It's a great situation for Scotland.
Yeah, I definitely think Scotland got away with it to a degree because they came up against that Welsh team. I think there are so many other teams that they'd have been playing against. If they produced that performance,
I think so.
They wouldn't have won the game. But credit to them for coming back. And if we're talking about moments, the quickly taken restart, Finn Russell, Darcy Graham, how much of your focus here is on Wales switching off and turning their backs, and how much of it is about heads up intelligent rugby from the Scots?
Not intelligent rugby, inspired rugby, and you need inspiration in certain positions, and Scotland have it in Finn Russell. It's very easy to say, oh, the other team were poor, we said it about England, but there's somebody, a couple of players make you look poor. Russell has that capacity to just make you look an idiot. And I was watching that game on television from the press room, and everyone was criticising Wales for not turning the back. And yes, there was a lucky bounce for Scotland and Darcy Graham. But those things happen when you've got geniuses coming up with things like Russell. He is a genie.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really irks me when you see something in professional sport that you're told not to do at schoolboy level. And I'm sure, Stu, you remember being taught, never turn your back, that type of thing, from whether it's a 10-metre tap penalty, whether it's a restart, anything like that. So, of course, that'll be irritating. And the fact that one of the men involved, James Botham, had an absolutely titanic game coming on earlier at flanker as well. Looks like he might get a run in the starting jersey as well now, of course. But Russell saw the opportunity. Yes, there was a bounce of the ball, but he put himself in that position where something magical could happen, and it did. And it did turn the game, really, that moment. After that felt like Wales had been deflated because they were clinging on, and then suddenly it was a real sucker punch.
Yeah, when that try happened, there weren't many. Everyone was in the press conference with you, but in the press room, those of us writing with an eye on the game said, Scotland win this now. You're absolutely right.
And that's why I asked you earlier, is it a game that Wales should have won? Because for me that was such a defining moment that was so fixable. And I'm being kind of harsh on Wales here. Like, overall it was a positive afternoon because, my God, we've been wanting to see something from this Welsh team for a while. But when you look at that moment, how pivotal it was, how much it totally changed the game and the momentum and the feel of it. Wales had just extended their lead, and then just like that, Scotland take a big chunk out of it. That's kind of why that's why I asked the question of how much did almost Wales mess this up.
And even after that, there were quite a few moments where Wales still could have taken the lead or won the game. It's there has been some talk about whether they get the rub of the green of refereeing decisions at the moment. It's not the first time we've heard people suggesting that teams under the pump get penalised more. I do wonder sometimes, it's chicken and egg. Are they being penalised because they're under pressure, or is there this thing in the referee's mind where they think, oh, they're under pressure, therefore, they don't get the rub of the green? The thing with Test rugby is, because sometimes you get decisions, sometimes you don't, you have to almost take the referee out of it, don't you? And if it's a narrow game like that, a tight scoreline, then of course when you lose you can point to those decisions. But if you're better, you don't you can then not point to those decisions because you've been good enough on the field that they don't feel like they've had as big of an impact.
The weaker a team, the more you go backwards. The more you go backwards, the harder it is to compete at breakdowns and scrums, and therefore the decisions go against you. And that's why there is a rationale for referees seeming to favour the teams that are on top, because they're in the positions to win the penalties and to force the penalties against Wales. But when you said should Wales have won, the answer is no. Could and should are irrelevancies. They're things you prepare for a match, and the could and shoulds are what happened in that moment. And Finn Russell just said, look, here's a could, but he had to put that kick in the right space, had the temerity to do it, and he did.
And now Scotland have backed up a win against England. They're kicking on in the Championship. The other match, the Sunday game, Elgan, you were there in Lille, France-Italy. Relatively comfortable win for France, although up until about 70 minutes it was still about 19-8. Was this another round of French dominance? Was the final scoreline actually more one-sided than the game suggests?
Certainly Gonzalo Quesada, the Italy head coach, thought the scoreline didn't quite tell the picture of what an even contest it had been. Like you say, it was 19-8 until the 70th minute. That fourth try came when Italy only had 13 men on the field. They'd had a yellow card, and they hadn't yet been able to replace the injured Ange Capuozzo because there was a bit of I was actually watching it, there was a bit of a clerical dispute on the sideline. I think they wanted to bring Monty Ioane on for Ange Capuozzo, but they still had a substitute flanker left over, so they had to bring him on. So I think a clerical error, and France taking the line out quite swiftly was what led to that situation, which Italy weren't happy about. But until that stage, yes, it was only 19-8. I think a very even contest. The difference was France's ability just to score out of nowhere. Those first three tries, the first one was at the end of the opening passage of the play, contestable kick that we're all talking about at the moment. It lands in Dupont's hands. He turns, kicks it downfield. Louis Bielbiere released out of a cannon, try. Another one, ball over the top of a line out. Emilien Gaeton runs onto it, 60 metres downfield, Ramos in support, try. Their ability to strike from nowhere is what separates them from the rest of the teams at the moment. We focus so much on their attack. Fabien Galtier, the head coach, said, actually, defence is what I'm really happy with at the moment. We've got more out there in attack at the moment. 3 games, they've scored 18 tries, they've only conceded 5. So they're not just great entertainers, they are great entertainers, but they can also harangue and tackle like any other team in the Championship as well.
Yeah, they look a complete team at the moment. I totally agree with Elgan there about France's capacity just to strike. And it needs reminding that good a player as Thomas Ramos is, full-back or fly-half, at the moment the loss of Jalibert is big, and he gives them that killer bite in the midfield. And Ramos, he 1 or 2 amazing sort of kicks and vision you can't believe he can have. He does that, but Jalibert at the moment is just constantly carving midfields apart, and he's destroying defences. And I was thinking about England on the train on the way here and how they defended so woefully against Ireland, not knowing when to come in, when to go out. And I'm thinking if their defence is like that when they go to Paris, Jalibert is just going to slice. I hate the cliche, but it's a knife butter scenario.
I still think France can win the Grand Slam if they have to keep Ramos at 10, but yeah, like you say, the difference with Jalibert was stark, because when Ramos is at 15, he's essentially the tertiary playmaker. 9, 10, 15, Dupont, Jalibert, Ramos can all act in control of the game, but because Ramos is that bit removed, he doesn't have, he can do his magic without sort of being that central figure, whereas I think we saw in Lille that the team can be a bit susceptible to his whims, where if it goes a bit against him, then obviously it impacts more if he's wearing that number 10 jersey than when he can be that secondary 10 behind Jalibert.
Yeah, okay, so France looking pretty good. We'll come on to their title prospects in just a moment. Just a word on Ireland, because I'd imagine a lot of the interaction we've had in terms of emails and stuff has been England focused. How much of a victory was Saturday, not just for this Irish team, but for Andy Farrell as a coach, and in particular as a motivator, which we've touched upon already, Stuart?
Well, he's taken a lot of stick in Ireland, a hell of a lot of stick in Ireland, and Ireland have been dismissed as, the past it team, the granddads. And I must admit, when they selected this team, the back 5 in the pack looked so experienced, and I'm thinking, I thought then that's a good team. And Gibson Park, I thought was very clever that they left Gibson Park out, and I don't think many people have said it. He was left out for Italy and wasn't very happy, and it was reported that he'd been dropped. But we've seen so many of the Lions from Australia, the Test Lions, not really hitting the straps at all in the Six Nations at all. And Gibson Park was one of those in the early, was first round in the autumn, not playing well. He took 80 minutes off, dropped, came back, absolutely brilliant. That is man management.
Yeah.
You say to someone, you're a really good player, but you need a break. You've still got it. And he came back and he just, he tore into England. And I thought it was brilliant man management on the part of Farrell. I thought Ireland looked, they were geared up physically and mentally for this match. England didn't at all. I mean, if it's about teams in the end, but there's also the sort of subplot, and if it's Borthwick versus Farrell, and that's probably 60-0 as opposed to 40-21. It was a real battering for the England management.
Yeah, and it looked to me like an Irish team where the coach had absolutely pressed the right buttons through the week. They looked on a different emotional level that compared to England, and that in itself is a problem. I tell you what, we'll take a very quick break, and after this we'll look ahead to the next round of action after this fallow week, and also we'll get into all your emails about England. Okay, before we get to the emails, 12 wins in a row before the last 2 weekends. How much damage have Ireland and Scotland and those defeats, Barnsey, done to England and where they are?
It's as much the nature of the performance as the defeats, and it's huge. I wrote in Monday's Times that I think that these two defeats, obviously numerically, it's not the same as 12 wins, but they're in a situation now where they go to Rome, and if we now have to imagine England losing to Italy, and if that happens, they then go to France, and England could be on the back of 4 terrible performances as opposed to a run of 12 wins where there were some good performances, but there was some average opposition as well, and suddenly it all looks paper thin, everything England achieved. And Steve Borthwick, his mantra at the moment is, we never said we were the best in the world and when we were winning, and we're not the worst in the world. Now we've lost a couple. Well, I don't know, my colleagues can write what they want, but I've never said England were the best team in the world. And right now, I'm not going to be prevented from saying they are probably playing the worst rugby I have seen since Steve Borthwick took over in 2023, when France put 53 points on them. And they've stopped playing rugby. They resorted to the box kick. The defensive pattern, I don't understand how England can be so naive at 12, 13. They can't put any width on their game in attack at the moment, other than the diagonal kick. And when Finn Russell or Jack Crowley puts width on the passing, they can't defend width. Get outside that 15-metre line, and England are desperate.
Yeah, I mean, let me put this to you, because Marcelo got in touch. Now, most of the emails we've had have been along the line of what you've been saying, and most of the reaction has obviously been pretty strong. But he said, as a neutral, watching England-Ireland, couldn't help but feel the fallout from it as a bit dramatic. England came into this as one of the favourites after a brilliant 12 months, so does 2 defeats really undo all of that? Is Borthwick really under pressure after 2 defeats? Were Ireland and Scotland not just the better team in both? And then looking ahead to Italy, my team, how worried are England about that game in Rome? So as you've said, Barnsey, it's more about the manner of the defeats rather than the defeats themselves. Yeah,
I think what strikes me is that England look like if just one thing goes off in their game plan, everything else just falls like a house of cards. They need to get the luck of the bounce on these contestable kicks. They need everything to be there just so that everything kind of works in clockwork. Whereas you think of some other teams, we've mentioned France's ability to strike. You feel like they can be off in some parts of the game, but suddenly they can just go 70 metres and score a try. Whereas England look like they are incapable of breaking a game open unless sort of everything is going their way. And in the last 2 games, obviously, very little has gone their way in that regard. So it has just collapsed like a house of cards. I think the exchange rate among fans would be 6 wins are equal to 1 defeat, because it does feel like the hope of those 12 wins has evaporated entirely in terms of the hearts and minds, as it were, of what they think of this England team.
Jake also got in touch and he said, I know you'll focus on the basic errors as the reason why we were so poor, but I think the last 2 games have shown is that without a fair wind, links to what you've just said, Elgan, we're just a limited team. An indication of a poor team is when they look overcoached when they're behind, which we definitely are. How much pressure, Barnsey, do you think Steve Borthwick is realistically under at this moment in time?
Probably not very much, because the RFU has a history of not acting in any capacity. But I would say...
Do you think that's the right thing then? Or
do I know? No, I don't. I think there should be pressure. It's a big job. It's one of the biggest in rugby, and it comes with pressure. And England have been risible for 2 games. There's no 2 ways about it. They've been terrible. And that question, when he said, "I know you're going to concentrate on the errors," I'm not going to concentrate on the errors. I'm going to say the primary reason why England have looked such a second-rate team in the last 2 matches is a managerial one. And I've been saying this about the last few years of Eddie Jones and the entire Borthwick period, which is the over-obsession with a game plan. England, because they've got big forwards, if they get it right up front, they can take on anyone, and that is what's happened. But when that goes, as we've been saying, France can split and go, and they can, they can have a difficult 40 minutes up front, but they can score 3 tries. England can't. England can't envisage it for the simple reason that England should have several game plans. They should have a game plan that can filter, in all sorts of directions. That's what France do. What England still have is the game plan. And the game plan is one game plan. And one game plan goes wrong, as it did in Murrayfield, as it did at Twickenham, then you're left with nothing. That is why from 1 to 23 you can look at the players, but the fault lies with the manager, with Steve Borthwick.
So I was going to ask you that, of how much is it on the coaches and how much is it on the players, because I get all of that, but I still look at some aspects of the England performance over these last two games, and the really sloppy reads in defence that Ellis Genge on Caelan Doris in the second half was a really, really bad one. There were lots of others throughout the game. The passes that are just going to hand, the sloppy skills, like, it's not all on the coaches, is it? Like, the players have been way off it the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, but it's foundations. And England's foundations. England are being set out what to do, and they're being set out, and it looks so rigid that the little when the big rigid picture goes, all the little things just crumble. It only takes a gust of wind and it's gone. I mean, the Ellis Genge, that just seemed petty and ridiculous, a sort of a barge when he wasn't tackling. But, you know, I'm looking at Fraser Dingwall stepping inside when he should never have stepped inside Balogun for a try. I'm looking at Ollie Lawrence, a feeble attempt at a tackle. But there's a structure and a shape here. The players, I think, are not treated with enough maturity. I think England are comfortable when they think the players know exactly what they've got to do, and exactly is one of the worst words in any sport. You can't. When my football team, Arsenal, try and play exactly to a game plan, they're trying to get a corner and win. In the second half against Tottenham Hotspur yesterday, suddenly Eze and co were shifting the patterns, and they were doing things Arsenal haven't done for 10 weeks, and they destroyed Tottenham. That's what happens when you got the freedom to just shift your pattern. England have no freedom. There is no shift. Therefore, if anything goes wrong, or Finn Russell comes up and he sticks a fork in it, then you've had it.
I'm quite impressed, Elgan, that it took Barnsey up to this point to mention the North London derby. I was expecting it earlier, to be honest. So you've shown good restraint there. I suppose with England, then, one of the things that I've been trying to work out here is, why has it come undone? Why has it all come tumbling down so swiftly off the back of a year where we were rightly giving them praise? Is it that teams have looked at what England do and realised there's quite an easy way to get the better of them, which is obviously win the aerial and then stretch them from sideline to sideline?
Well, the width is important, and the fact that England's kicking game hasn't worked. They kick so much box kicks again on Saturday, and they're just not winning any of them. And even
they didn't kick it loads. Like the numbers of kicks and things actually hasn't been as high as I think people might suspect. They've been losing a lot of those aerials.
They're not winning any of them, and even when they go for them, they go high. It's become a 50-50 now. You pick Freddie Stuart at fullback in an era now when he can't be protected, and his statistics of takes, I think he was 87% last season. He's under 70% now. These are figures you say, well, if those are his stats, why are you picking him?
Yeah,
but England, and especially when England are a stats-driven team, but why are they losing? I say it again, you know, these other teams have got into their game plans, and England can't play when teams pick the lock of the game plan, and there's complacency. Ellis Genge made the point, didn't he, Elgan, saying after beating Wales 48-10 we were a bit complacent. Now, that is an indictment again of management psychologically, because Wales have been on the most terrible trot of not just results but performances. England were brilliant in Cardiff when they beat them 68-14 in 2025. They were pretty good in Twickenham, and for them to go out to travel to Edinburgh thinking they're the bee's knees because of beating Wales 48-10, you know, something is amiss in terms of that England are overconfident, they're overcoached, they're over everything.
Yeah, I'll be really interested to know from England. I think Steve Borthwick has spoken about this in the way in which they still want to attack, but he used to speak about wanting to be this fast ball movement team, and I feel like we haven't seen that for ages. Do you remember 2 years ago when they did beat Ireland at Twickenham? And that first try England scored, when Ireland kicked, Furbank ran it back, they shifted it to the left, it ended up with Ollie Lawrence scoring in the corner. It feels like we haven't seen anything like that from them for quite a while.
Yeah, and I think back to some of those performances, and I think that they had someone like George Furbank at fullback, didn't they? And I'm sure there'll be some clamour for when he's fit and ready to get someone like him, a ball playing 15, back in. There'll probably be clamour for maybe Max Ajomo and Ollie Lawrence to combine, do their Bath partnership in the centres as well. I think Steve Borthwick has received a lot of credit for some quite bold selection decisions in the past, and we did see it again, I suppose, last weekend. Taking off 2 players before half time. It's the type of thing that is quite a bold thing to do, to admit that. We've seen that the selection of Henry Arundel on the wing as well is quite an exciting selection. But Barnsey, you'll be able to comment on this as well, that for Bath, it sometimes looks like he's a bit of a passenger out wide, doesn't it? And England certainly haven't figured out how best to get an exciting talent like him out wide involved in the game either, whether it's in the middle of the field roaming around or releasing him in space out wide either.
No, I mean, I go back to the early career of Damien McKenzie. I watched him when he was a youngster in New Zealand, and he was playing for the Maoris, and he was a brilliant talent. But he couldn't quite work out how to dominate the game, and it took a long time for the All Blacks to actually get him functioning. England with Arundel are really struggling. I don't think it's the easiest aspect of his game. I felt that in the third and fourth playoff game in the World Cup against Argentina, it was partly the fact it was as if he didn't know the other 14 guys on the pitch, but he stood on the touchline, and he does for Bath a bit. But having said that, we are in an era where wide men are encouraged to stand on the touchline, so he's there waiting, and it's like, it's waiting for Godot almost. It's just this weird thing, thinking, what are you doing? I mean, Henry Pollock spent more time standing on the wing, and this is not a criticism of Pollock. It's an indictment of England. England thought this guy is a brilliant runner. He's powerful. So he hit one breakdown, then he flies off to the right wing or to the left wing, and everyone was saying, cool, Ireland did a number on England at the breakdown. Well, of course they did, because England were basically playing a man light at the breakdown all the time. So the pressure on people like Ben Earl to really come up with the goods and Curry were huge, because Ireland had back rowers in the second row, and they were playing close to the breakdown. England had 3 open sides, and one of them wasn't involved in the breakdown. That is not an indictment of Pollock. It is an indictment of England almost trying to be too clever.
Yeah, when I looked at the selections and you compared the 2 packs, I thought England had a back row that was there to get to the breakdown first. Like, it was a speedy, fast, athletic back row, but it was Tyg Byrne, Caelan Doris and those boys that had the better of it there. Mark also emailed us and he said, I was at the England game, and speaking as a Newcastle Red Bulls supporter, the experience was similar to a Red Bulls game in that the opposition seems superior in every facet, and any chance of a victory disappears early in the first half. I thought England had turned a corner and these soul-destroying defeats were behind us, but it seems not. The last England game I saw live was the harrowing defeat to France. I was meant to go to Italy game last year but got stuck in Newcastle airport. I regretted there weren't any issues for my flight this time. Based on yesterday, I can't see England winning again for a while, which gets us on to round 4. Italy-England. I mean, I said to Will and Charlie at Twickenham on Saturday, Elgan, are Italy now favourites for this? And they both said no, the weight of history, England have never lost to them. But based upon the 2 performances we've seen from England, plus the improving Italy we're witnessing, what do you reckon? How do you see the balance of power ahead of that game?
I still think England are narrow 1-score favourites, just because I know it's a different era of rugby, these are different teams, but we've been here before where we've gone into this match and thought, I think Italy could just about be favourites here, and England have always found a way of doing it, and that's why I think if they did lose, then suddenly we would then be in a situation where people are considering, right, what on earth is going on here? Because historic defeats by Italy are results that do lead to reckonings for careers of players and coaches alike.
I don't think they should this time, by the way. Razzie Erasmus made the point in the autumn Italy are fast improving, and they are fast improving. And, I thought in many ways they were excellent. Their set piece, their scrum in particular, is very powerful, and it's going to trouble England. And historically, if England's scrum is under pressure, the scrum half goes, the half back link goes, then we got a real issue. As I said, Monday's paper, imagine Italy beating England. We've always sort of, what you said, Will and Alex, sort of, that you go back through history, it can't happen. But looking back to the past is not the smart way to looking forward to the next game. And it's in Rome. Italy will have no... they'll have no mental demons, will they? They'll believe they can win this one. I think they'll go into this game thinking they will win, and that may be the first time we've ever been in that scenario. So Steve Borthwick, who has not been able to get his players in the right mental state for the last two, he's got a big issue, because Italy are going to be up for this one, irrelevant of what happened to France. England wouldn't have done any better than 33-8 on current form. So if I was a bookmaker, I would be thinking long and hard before I made the odds here. I think it's tight.
Barnsey's completely right to highlight how good Italy have been the last 3 rounds. Like we say, 33-8, but they were in that game. They've been in all 3 games. One decision goes differently from the TMO in that Ireland game, and they would have been, 7 points up, and would have had the wind beneath their sails. So that was such a close game. Obviously beat Scotland in the first round. What I think why it would be so momentous were this result to finally happen, because Italy have never beaten England, is just what it would do in the minds of the supporters who, as we've talked about, have already not checked out, but they're already catastrophizing about what's happening. Because England tends to be, and I've used this phrase before, flat track bullies. They don't lose to the smaller nations very often in the history of their game. That's why the defeat by Fiji in that World Cup warm-up felt so galling for it to finally happen, because Fiji actually beat them. Other teams have lost to Fiji before, so they're not quite so surprised when it happens, when, thinking about Wales and other teams. But when it happens to England, the response is that much larger, because they tend to always find a way to win those games against the smaller nations that they're not expected to. That's why, even if in a rugby perspective it wouldn't be that much of a shock if Italy win, sort of culturally and in the minds of England fans, it would be a real low point.
Cheltenham horse racing's come in, so every now and again I think about bookmaking, and you look at form lines. If you don't look at form lines, you lose a lot of money when you go racing for a few days. Look at the form lines of Italy, England at the moment. Italy beat Scotland. Scotland flattened England. Italy went to Dublin and, as Elgan so rightly said, were quite close to a shock result. Close. England, they played Ireland, got absolutely flattened. On the form lines, Italy are half a stone better than England, to use a horse analogy. There are a lot of points on that. Now, it isn't that straightforward, because Italy have got to get it into their heads that they can win. A lot of this is going to be on their management convincing them. If that can be done with a scrum and a maturity in their half-back decision-making and real spike in their backline, Italy have a proper chance of beating England.
Final question on England. Daniel on Twitter asked, is it the end of Stuart? What do we think in terms of personnel and the sort of changes we might see from Steve Borthwick?
I think he probably shouldn't be in the 23 for the Italy game, and that they should have more of a ball-playing 15. And
Furbank might come back. He's been returning from injury, hasn't he?
Yeah, I think he would be the man. And then obviously you're unlikely to have an out-and-out fullback on the bench, so therefore if Stuart doesn't start, he's unlikely to be on the bench. Can
I just ask as well, Barnsey, about George Ford? Because there's been a lot of chat about Ford off the back of the Ireland game. I'm not saying that he's, his international career is over by any stretch, but as a former fly half yourself.
Well, George Ford was the darling, wasn't he, of England in that 12-match run from the Argentina game onwards. And with some reason, he played beautifully. I've been disappointed with George Ford, especially in Scotland, where I thought he explained to us why England kicked and why it wasn't aimless, and then went and gave Scotland the ball. He told Scotland what they were going to do. I don't think he was he's played that badly. But it's, of course, the 2 kicks that didn't find touch, that magnifies it. 80,000 people having a good-natured, admittedly, but jeering at him when he finds touch. I mean, it puts him under pressure. But I still think Steve Borthwick really needs someone with an experienced and astute rugby brain. What they don't want to do is go to Rome and say, okay, we're not going to kick everything. Sorry, we're not going to kick we're not going to kick as much. In fact, we're not going to kick at all, and they lose all shape. They've got to have a shape. Because what England want to do, England's idea is to get territory. They get territory by kicking long. They're kicking high, and that's not smart at the moment. So they kick long. They then try and use their chasers to force the pressure. They force the kicks back, and then they hit on the counter. It's what South Africa do with a brilliant back 3. It's why your comment about Furbank is absolutely right. In that Ireland game, they had Faye Wabosa on the pitch as well, alongside Furbank. They had blokes who were just electric. When Ireland were forced to kick and they didn't kick well, England carved them up. When you play Freddie Stewart, you can get squeezed territorially by the boot of Ford and the England pack, but you can boot the ball 50 metres and it might not be a great kick and he won't punish you. That's part of the jigsaw, and it worries me that England don't see to play the territorial pressure game. You have to have a back 3 who are counter-attackers, and it makes you think, do they understand even what they're trying to do? It's a question mark. It's a real worry.
So England make the trip to Rome in round 4. Elsewhere, Ireland, Wales, Scotland, France. So really good weekends for Ireland and Scotland, as we've said already. Who's more in the title mix? I know France are way out in front as the favourites, but between Ireland and their recent history, or Scotland and the potential of that team, who do you view as a more serious contender for the title if you had to say someone other than the French?
I think that Ireland are... I mean, there is almost no part of me that expects Wales to beat Ireland on a Friday night in Dublin. For all their improvements in that Scotland game, there's no part of me that expects that to happen on that Friday night on March 6th. So we're looking at Ireland going into that final round, played 4-1-3. Scotland, like I say, I do think that will be a huge test for France, but I still think France should win. So then Scotland will be going into that final round 1-2 out of 4. But then before the tournament, I did back Scotland to win that final game in Dublin. So we could have a situation where they both won 3 at the end of it, but where Ireland are in the title hunt going into it.
Barnsey?
I think Ireland are in the better position. I think Ireland played a top-class game at Twickenham, and that's going to put them in good stead for the rest of the tournament. And Scotland got away with that, and like I said earlier on this podcast, that will really help them because they were complacent and they pulled it off. But I think when all is said and done, France are probably right now a little bit clear of the rest of the world as second best team, and I think that will show, and I think they will go into the England game hunting the Grand Slam when, funnily enough, we might see an England team with the pressure off in a weird way.
In a sense, yeah. On France, we'll actually pose this question on WhatsApp. Are we about to see France win a Grand Slam in kind of third gear?
It's a good question. I think they were higher than third gear for that first round against Ireland, weren't
Definitely.
they? Then they had obviously the Wales game, which just takes on a whole tenor of its own because of the crowd, because of the problems in Welsh rugby, and they knew that they could just have fun for 80 minutes, and they did. They were very exciting. The Italy game, yeah, they weren't great. We talked about why having Thomas Ramos at 10 kind of affected them, but they've still got, like I say, Scotland at Murrayfield. That is a really appetising, challenging fixture where they will have to be on the top of their game. And then to go for a Grand Slam at Paris, even if it's at home to an England team with all these question marks over them, I think they have gone higher than third gear, haven't they? Certainly in that first round. I mean, I think we forget going into that game, it wasn't guaranteed that we thought France would win beat Ireland by 22 points, and they were 29-0 up at one stage, weren't they? They absolutely blitzed them in those first 50 minutes.
Six Nations is very different in a studio podcast into being out on the pitch.
Shockingly.
France were outstanding for much of that match against Ireland, and France might need to be, because Scotland have shown a capacity to be outstanding themselves at home, and they will play France and they will cast themselves into the role of underdogs, and they will be very dangerous. And even if France win that, you know, we can slate England all we like, but England have got a big old pack, and England can go there. And we've had 3 rounds of the Six Nations, and if we aren't sane enough to have seen the shocks we didn't see coming before, if we're not, now it's over, you know, you cannot dismiss England, no matter how poor they've been, producing a big one-off game. And you say, well, how are they going to do that? I have no bloody idea how they're going to do that. But that's the beauty of sport. Things just happen from nowhere.
And that is the one thing I would say as well about France, who look supreme at the moment. Easily have looked the best team in this championship. But I suppose they haven't yet found themselves in a game where you really feel like they're going to lose. They haven't been put under that kind of pressure. Now, I think if they are, I think they have the weapons and the tools to answer those questions, but you just never know. And as you say, so far, these first 3 rounds of this Six Nations have taught us that you just never know on any given weekend.
Yeah, I mean, I alluded to it last week about how there haven't been many Grand Slams in history where you've wiped the floor with everyone. When I was talking about England in the 1990s and 1920s, I forgot to mention the reason I was looking into it at the time was because the Ireland Grand Slam of 3 years ago, they didn't yield any losing bonus points. They got 4 try-scoring bonus points, and only in the Scotland game did they miss out on a 4-try bonus point. So as recently as 3 years ago, we had Ireland achieving one of the most dominant Grand Slams there has ever been in the history of when it was 4 teams, 5 teams, or 6 teams. So if France do wipe the floor with Scotland at Murrayfield, wipe the floor with England at Paris, then we would be looking at it as perhaps the most dominant Grand Slam there has ever been in this championship. What that tells us is that there is a very strong likelihood that they will have to battle through one of the 2 games to come.
Good stuff. Well, it is set up nicely. Fallow week this week. We will then be back with you next Monday to fully build up to round 4. We'll also be in Rome for that Italy-England game. Barnsey, back on the Wiltshire Express today, hopefully on time like it was on the way out here.
Yeah, I might see a mate of mine called Trotsky for a quick beer before I go, and then I shall be home and pondering round 4 of the Six Nations.
And you're going to be back with us next Monday as well.
I am back next Monday on the Wiltshire Express.
Excellent, good stuff. Look forward to it. Elgan, what does your week look like?
St David's Day evensong, usual Wednesday night entertainment, and then which will be good fun. And then looking forward to round 4, I'll be up at Murrayfield for that Scotland-France game. Very much looking forward to that.
Could be championship. I mean, we say it every weekend, but could be championship defining that one.
Absolutely, I'm fully expecting it to be a belter.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you once again to all of you that got in touch and sent us an email. If you want to do that, then the email address is theruck@thetimes.co.uk. Thank you for listening. This has been The Ruck, the journalists' rugby podcast from The Times and The Sunday Times.